All right, so today we're heading somewhere uh pretty incredible.
Definitely
The
incredible.
Faroe Islands.
Yeah,
Now I have to admit, even I had to look at a map to remind myself where they were again.
right.
But once you see those pictures,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like straight out of a movie.
Dramatic landscapes,
Right.
those
These cliffs
and those villages.
tucked away like hidden treasures.
Exactly. And it's funny because that kind of physical isolation, it's almost like a metaphor for their whole story.
Oh, tell me more about that.
What they've got this history that's as rugged and independent as those islands themselves.
And that's what we're diving into today, right? This
Oh,
isn't just about pretty scenery.
oh no.
We're going deep on the Faroe Islands quest for, what is it, self-determination.
Self-determination, exactly.
And to
Right.
do that, we're going straight to the source.
Okay, love it.
Official documents from the Faroese government outlining their perspective on their own legal and political status.
So we're really getting inside their heads,
Exact.
understanding how they see themselves on the world stage.
And maybe even more importantly, where they see themselves going in the future.
Right, because they're at this crossroads. And to understand that we have to go way back,
Way back.
like Viking times, way back.
Okay, so set the scene for us.
All right, so picture this 9th century.
Okay.
Viking longships appearing on the horizon.
They weren't just passing through, were they?
No, they were here to stay. These weren't your grab-and-go Vikings.
Right.
They were establishing roots, building settlements, creating a whole new society from scratch. And
Right.
get this, they brought their own legal and political systems with them.
Really? So they weren't interested in adopting anyone else's rule.
Not a chance.
Oh.
They had their own way of doing things rooted in those early Viking traditions.
So are we talking like full-on Viking councils and things?
Exactly. Imagine those gatherings. Free men debating laws, face-to-face, settling disputes. It was raw, direct democracy. It's like the bedrock of Faroe's self-governance.
That's incredible. So you have these fiercely independent Vikings establishing their own laws, their own systems for centuries. How does Denmark even enter the picture?
Well, like so many power shifts in history, it all starts with a wedding.
Juicy.
It's 1380. The kingdoms of Norway and Denmark, they tie the knot, so to speak. A royal marriage.
Okay.
This sets off this chain reaction, centuries of interconnected rule.
And the Faroe Islands, what happens to them?
They get swept up in it all.
Right.
By 1814, through a series of treaties and agreements, they end up linked with Denmark.
And they were okay with this, just going along with it.
Well, here's the thing, and the Faroes government documents are very clear on this point. They remained a distinct territory.
Meaning,
They never actually voted to become part of the Kingdom of Denmark.
it's like they're holding on to their own apartment keys, even though Denmark became the building manager.
That's a great way to put it. And that's key to understanding their mindset even today. They never relinquished that claim to their own space.
Which makes their situation during World War II even more complicated.
Oh, absolutely, World War II. Talk about a game changer for the Faroes.
Tell me everything.
So Denmark gets occupied by Germany, right? Cut off from its territories.
Including the Faroe Islands.
Exactly. And into that vacuum steps Great Britain.
They occupied the Faroe Islands.
They did.
Sure.
Strategically important, you see. But this forced separation from Denmark, it created a vacuum, an opportunity.
And the Faroese people being the independent folks they are, I'm sensing they didn't let that opportunity pass them by.
Not a chance. They stepped right up, started taking control of their own affairs out of necessity.
I mean, what else could they do?
It was a remarkable moment. A global conflict throws these islands into the deep end, and they start swimming. This period of de facto independence, even if it was born out of circumstance, it solidified something for the Faroes people.
What's up?
That desire for self-governance. They got a taste of it, and they wanted more.
And that leads us right to 1946 and that landmark referendum,
Ah, yes, a referendum.
where the Faroese people voted for independence.
They did. Overwhelmingly, in fact.
You'd think that would be the end of the story, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? I mean, that's usually how these things work, right? The people speak, they vote.
Case closed.
Yeah, you'd think so. But it's not always so clean-cut, is it?
Especially not when you're dealing with centuries of history.
Exactly. And, this part of the story, it really highlights how complex these self-determination issues can be.
Okay, so walk me through it. The people vote for independence. What happens next?
Well, the Danish government at the time, they weren't exactly thrilled with the outcome.
I can imagine.
They'd formally approved the referendum, but letting go entirely. That was a different story.
So what did they do?
They dissolved the Faroese parliament,
Oh, wow. They just shut it down.
essentially. Yeah, it was a bold move for sure. And it really threw a wrench in things.
So much for a clean break. So what did the Faroese people do? Just accept this.
No way. They're not the kind to back down that easily. Remember, this is a culture steeped in self-reliance.
Going all the way back to those Viking roots.
Precisely. So they entered into negotiations with the Danish government. And these weren't just your casual chats over coffee.
I bet.
These were intense, high-stakes talks aimed at finding some kind of compromise.
And did they?
They did. Eventually, they reached an agreement known as the Home Rule Act of 1948.
Home Rule Act. Okay, so not full independence then.
Not quite. It was a kind of halfway house.
Meaning, what did it actually change?
Well, it granted the Faroe Islands a significant degree of autonomy to manage their internal affairs.
Okay. So things like education, healthcare, local laws, that sort of thing.
Exactly. They even got their own flag and national anthem.
So they had a say in how their society functioned day to day.
They did. But there were still some pretty big caveats.
Such as?
Things like defense, foreign policy, international relations. Those still remained largely under Danish control.
So still tethered to Denmark in a lot of ways.
It was a trade-off, a balancing act. Acknowledging that historical connection while also creating space for the Faroes to shape their own future, at least to a certain extent.
And this home rule arrangement, it wasn't a done deal, was it? I mean, here we are all these years later still talking about potential independence.
You're right. It was never meant to be a permanent solution, more of a stepping stone on that road to self-determination.
And there were more steps to come, right? Because in 2005, there was another pivotal agreement.
There was.
Yeah.
And this one really pushed the boundaries because it wasn't just about internal self-governance anymore.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me everything.
This new agreement, it actually granted a degree of external self-governance.
Now that sounds significant. What does that even mean? Can they sign treaties, have their own embassies?
It's not quite that extensive, but it's still a big deal. They gained more autonomy in negotiating certain international agreements.
Like what?
Things that directly affect their economy. So fishing rights, for example, that's huge for them.
Absolutely, given they're surrounded by some of the richest fishing grounds in the world.
Right, so it allows them to have a seat at the table when decisions are being made about resources that are vital to their livelihood.
Makes sense. But I'm sensing a but here. They still need Denmark's approval for certain things, right?
You're catching on. It's a delicate balance. While they have more autonomy in some areas, broader foreign policy decisions, defense security, those still require Danish consent.
Still operating within some constraints. So how has the Faroese government responded to this latest agreement? Do they see it as the final word on their relationship with Denmark?
That's the key question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the answer is not really. They've been very clear that they see these agreements as important steps.
Right.
But they don't replace their right to full self-determination.
Okay. So in their eyes, the door is still open.
Wide open.
Yeah.
And they've been actively taking steps to prepare for that potential future. Which brings us to what I think is the most fascinating development of all. The drafting of a new Faroese constitution.
Okay, so this isn't just some routine legal update.
Not at all.
Yeah.
This is about codifying their vision for the future. And it includes some very interesting provisions.
Like what?
Like provisions for a potential future referendum on secession from Denmark. They're laying the groundwork for a future where they are fully independent.
Wow. That's a bold statement. And how has Denmark responded to this?
You might be surprised to hear that it's actually been quite positive. We've seen repeated declarations from successive Danish prime ministers expressing their support for Faroe's independence.
Really? So they're not opposed to the idea?
It seems not. Even the Danish parliament has echoed this sentiment. Back in 2001, they basically said that if the Faroese people choose independence, Denmark will respect that decision.
Wow. So it sounds like they're on the same page, at least in principle.
In principle, yes. But of course, putting that into practice, that's a whole other story.
It always is, isn't it? So many layers to this story.
Right. It's like they're holding all the cards, but deciding when to play them. That's the real balance.
Yeah. And it's not just a legal or political calculation, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. This goes way deeper. It's about identity.
Yeah.
About weighing those deep historical ties against this pull of forging your own path entirely.
And something we've seen play out in other parts of the world, too, right?
All over. Think about Scotland, Catalonia, just to name a few.
Exactly. These self-determination movements. Some succeed, some, well, they don't. It makes you wonder, is there like a magic formula?
If only it were that simple.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's no easy answer. Each case is unique. A tangle of history, culture, economics.
Don't forget about economics. That's got to be a major factor for the Faroe Islands.
Huge
I
factor.
mean, they're a small nation heavily reliant on fishing.
And they receive subsidies from Denmark. Don't forget about that.
Right, so independence could be a risky proposition.
It's a balancing act, for sure.
Mhm.
But that's where those articles in the new Faroes Constitution become even more important.
How so?
They're not just dreaming of independence. They're laying the groundwork, trying to build a framework that's economically viable.
So it's about proving they can stand on their own 2 feet.
Exactly. It's about taking control of their own destiny.
Which is really what self-determination is all about, isn't it? It's been quite a journey exploring this story, from those early Viking settlers to wartime independence, from navigating home rule to drafting a constitution for a potential future as an independent nation.
And it really highlights the resilience of the Faroes people.
Absolutely. They might be small, but they've certainly got a knack for navigating complex terrain.
Both literally and metaphorically.
Yeah.
And they remind us that these stories of self-determination, they're never really over, are they?
It's an ongoing process, constantly evolving.
Exactly. And who knows what the next chapter holds? Will they become a fully independent nation? Will they find some new, even more evolved arrangement with Denmark?
Only time will tell.
Exactly. But one thing's for sure, the Faroe Islands, with their history, their spirit, and those incredible landscapes,
Those landscapes.
they're going to keep making their mark on the world whatever path they choose.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive into the heart of the North Atlantic. A huge thank you to our expert for guiding us through this fascinating story.
My pleasure. Always a treat to talk about the Faroe Islands.
And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.